The sun was dipping below the dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest as Dr. Ilara Voss stood in the observation room of the hidden research station. Its walls were lined with dark metal panels gleaming under the low artificial light, while the humming of the machines provided a steady background to her thoughts. She looked out over the jungle, its vastness stretching out in every direction, almost as if the trees were reaching toward the horizon itself. Somewhere out there, unseen and unheard, were the creatures she had been studying for years, the apex predators of Earth and beyond. For the past 2 decades, Ilara had been leading a unique research project, an exploration into the strange relationship between humans and the predators of Earth's ecosystems. This wasn't an ordinary study of animal behavior. It was a deep dive into the complex ways in which these creatures interacted with humanity. Despite their natural instincts to dominate and protect their territory, some of Earth's most formidable predators, beasts like lions, jaguars, and wolves, seemed to have an uncanny level of trust toward humans. This wasn't just about coexistence. It was about something deeper, something that no one had been able to fully explain. Ilara's work had been controversial. Many believed that humans should not interfere with these wild creatures, especially in their natural habitats. Others saw her research as an intrusion, something that would upset the fragile balance between man and nature. Yet to Ilara, it was a question worth answering. Why, for reasons no one could quite define, did apex predators allow humans into their worlds? Why did they permit their cubs to interact with human researchers, even leaving them in their care? It was a phenomenon that had baffled scientists for centuries, and Ilara believed she was on the verge of uncovering the truth. Her fingers gently brushed against the cold glass of the observation window. Below her, on the lush forest floor, a group of bioluminescent animals scampered among the trees. The research facility, nestled deep within the jungle, was designed to observe these creatures in their natural environments without disturbing the delicate balance they had established. Despite the secrecy surrounding the location, Ilara had spent years cultivating a rapport with the local predators, learning their behaviors and understanding their instincts. But even now, as the day grew darker and the forest began to quiet, a feeling of unease washed over her. Something wasn't right. The data from the day's observations had shown disturbing trends. The large felines, the ones that had always been so trusting, had begun to behave erratically. They were pacing, growling at the cameras, and even retreating from their usual human caretakers. Ilara sighed and leaned back in her chair. She ran a hand through her short dark hair, the weight of her thoughts pressing against her like a storm. The data was inconclusive, but the patterns were clear. The creatures were changing. Their behavior was becoming unpredictable. The trust that had once seemed so effortless, so ingrained, was beginning to unravel. A soft knock on the door snapped her from her reverie. Without waiting for an invitation, Dr. Mara Quinlan stepped inside. "Mara, what's going on?" Ilara asked, gesturing to the various monitors that displayed the activity in the compound's various observation zones. Mara's face was drawn, her brows furrowed in concern. "You need to see this." Ilara followed her without hesitation, and the two of them hurried down the narrow corridor to the main control room. The room was bathed in a harsh glow from the console screens. The team had been monitoring an intergalactic lioness, a predator from the distant planet Kethra that had been part of the research for months. The lioness had been unusually docile, allowing the humans to care for her cubs and even permitting them to enter her den without any signs of aggression. As they reached the main terminal, Mara activated the live feed. The lioness, a creature of immense power and beauty, appeared on the screen. Her sleek golden fur rippled as she paced back and forth, her amber eyes glowing in the low light of the jungle. The footage was being recorded in infrared, and Ilara could see the small shape of her cubs nestled together, safe in the corner of the den. For a moment, the scene seemed normal, peaceful even. Then, without warning, the lioness froze. Her nostrils flared as she lifted her head, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. She growled low in her throat, a deep rumble that sent a ripple through Ilara's chest. The camera feed shook slightly as the animal shifted its stance, her gaze darting toward the researchers' cameras as if she could sense their presence. "Something's not right," Mara murmured. "She's never reacted like this before." Ilara felt a shiver crawl up her spine. This wasn't the lioness they had been studying for months. This was an entirely different creature, an animal that felt threatened, on edge, and suspicious of its surroundings. "Let's see if we can get a closer feed," Ilara suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara nodded and adjusted the cameras remotely. The screen zoomed in on the lioness's face. For a moment, the two women were staring into the lioness's amber eyes, a gaze so intense and full of knowing that Ilara could feel it through the monitor. The lioness blinked slowly, then tilted her head toward the entrance of the den. She was alert now, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to spring. "I think we should go in," Ilara said, her voice firm. "We need to assess the situation before it gets worse." Mara hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "I'll prep the team." Ilara grabbed her communicator and made her way to the transport bay, her mind racing. The lioness had been the most cooperative of all the apex predators they had studied. She had allowed the researchers to approach her cubs without hesitation, even in the presence of other creatures that could have threatened them. But now, something was different. The atmosphere in the compound had shifted, and it felt like the very air had thickened with danger. By the time Ilara arrived at the transport bay, the rest of the team had assembled, each person suited up in protective gear. They were ready to head out into the jungle, but Ilara knew that this was no ordinary mission. This was no longer just a study. This was about survival. The transport vehicle hummed to life as they made their way toward the observation zone where the lioness and her cubs were being kept. The rainforest outside the armored vehicle seemed to pulse with life, the shadows of the trees stretching long and deep as the vehicle moved through the thick undergrowth. The sounds of the jungle, which had once been soothing, now felt ominous, like a warning. As they approached the site, Ilara's eyes scanned the horizon. The animal sensors had picked up movement, but it wasn't the lioness they were concerned about. There were other creatures in the jungle now, large predators that hadn't been there before, creatures from distant planets, beings that had been part of the Intergalactic wildlife exchange, and some of them were known for their violent tendencies. "We're approaching the zone," Mara said, her voice tense over the comms. Ilara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. When they arrived at the observation site, the scene before them was nothing short of surreal. The lioness, still on edge, stood just outside her den, her head held high as she scanned the trees. The cubs were no longer nestled together. They were scattered, one of them anxiously pacing, another trembling in the corner of the den. A sense of dread crept up Ilara's spine. The balance between predator and prey, between human and beast, had always been a fragile one. But now, it felt as though that balance was about to collapse entirely. "Ilar," Mara's voice broke through her thoughts. "Look." On the other side of the clearing, a massive figure emerged from the jungle. It was a creature they hadn't encountered before, larger than any of the local predators, with sleek black fur and piercing red eyes. It was moving slowly, but there was a menacing grace to its movements. The team froze, unsure of how to proceed. Ilara's pulse quickened. "What is that?" Before Mara could respond, the lioness let out a fierce, guttural roar. The strange creature paused, seemingly acknowledging the challenge, but then something happened that no one had anticipated. Instead of retreating, the lioness approached the cubs, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. She placed herself between the young and the unknown predator, her body rigid with hostility. "You look great." In that moment, Ilara understood. This wasn't just about survival. This was about trust, a bond forged over generations. The lioness trusted them to protect her cubs, just as she would protect them with her life. And now, that trust was being tested by an unseen force. As the tension in the air thickened, Ilara realized that their mission had just shifted. They were no longer just researchers. They were guardians, standing between the predators and the unknown threat that was closing in. The question, now more urgent than ever, echoed in her mind. Could they prove worthy of that trust? The answer would come soon, and it would determine the fate of all those involved, human, predator, and cub alike. The rainforest was alive, the deep hum of the jungle vibrating through the floor of the transport vehicle as it bounced over uneven terrain. Outside, the trees towered above them, their leaves thick with the weight of moisture, while strange bioluminescent creatures blinked in and out of existence along the forest floor. It had rained earlier, leaving the air thick and heavy, and now a dense fog rolled in, obscuring everything in a veil of white mist. As they made their way through the jungle, Elara's mind churned with unanswered questions. What had happened to the lioness? She had been an anomaly, an apex predator that until recently had trusted humans to a degree that no one could have anticipated. And now, there she was, on edge, acting out of character. The tranquility that had marked her behavior for so long was gone, replaced by a heightened alertness and a protective ferocity that bordered on desperation. Elara had never seen anything like it before, not from a creature of her kind. Is it possible that something in the jungle is affecting their behavior? Mara's voice crackled through the comms, pulling Elara from her thoughts. I don't know, Elara replied, her tone edged with frustration. It's like the whole ecosystem is changing. The predators, they're acting differently. And it's not just the lioness. Every observation zone is showing signs of the same thing. The patterns are all wrong. Mara's voice came back, tight with concern. We might be dealing with something far bigger than we thought. The transport creaked as they neared their destination, a part of the jungle Elara had visited many times before, but never under circumstances like these. The lioness's den, a small, protected area hidden beneath thick trees and vines, was just ahead. But it wasn't just the lioness they were concerned about now. It was the sense that something, some invisible force, was affecting every creature in the jungle. There was an unnatural stillness that made Elara's skin crawl, as though the very air had thickened with an unspoken tension. When they arrived at the edge of the clearing, the transport came to a slow halt. The familiar landmarks, the thick bark of ancient trees and the low hum of insects, felt eerily distant. The team disembarked swiftly, weapons and protective gear in place, each person moving with purpose, though Elara could sense the quiet fear beneath their stoic exteriors. As the group made their way toward the lioness's den, Elara's eyes scanned the surroundings. The familiar scent of the jungle, rich with the smells of earth and growing things, hung in the air, but there was something else. A sharp tang of something unfamiliar, something metallic and cold. The underbrush shifted as they walked, the branches creaking and bending in odd ways. A large shadow passed across the forest floor, the quiet rustle of leaves alerting them to the presence of something large. The creatures here were restless, alert, sensing the disturbance that had swept through their domain. When they reached the den, Elara's heart raced. The lioness stood at the entrance, her powerful form taut with tension. Her golden fur gleamed in the low light, but her body language was all wrong. She was on edge, her muscles coiled, ready to strike. "Stay back," Elara whispered to the team, raising her hand to halt them. The lioness's amber eyes flickered toward them, her gaze scanning each human in turn before returning to the distant jungle. She was guarding something. Her cubs, Elara thought, but they weren't where they should have been. In the corner of the den, nestled among the ferns, one of the cubs cowered, while the other two remained hidden behind the lioness. The lioness growled softly, a low rumble that vibrated through the air, as if daring anyone to come closer. "Elara," Mara said, her voice barely audible over the low growl of the lioness. "Something's wrong. I don't think it's just the jungle, it's her. She's not acting like herself." Elara nodded grimly. "We need to get a closer look, carefully. Stay alert." They approached slowly, moving in a loose formation around the edge of the den. The lioness's eyes tracked them, her ears twitching at every sound, her claws digging into the earth. But she didn't move, she didn't attack. Instead, she stood guard, her body radiating an intense protective energy. a barrier between her cubs and whatever threat she had sensed in the jungle. As Elara inched closer, she could feel the tension building between the two of them, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The lioness, once the epitome of calm and trust, was now a fierce protector. But what was she protecting them from? And why did it feel as though the balance of the jungle had shifted so drastically? "Elara, I don't think she's going to let us near the cubs," Mara said, her voice strained with concern. "We don't have a choice," Elara replied, her heart pounding. She needed to understand what was happening here, and to do that she had to get closer to the cubs. The lioness wouldn't just let anyone near them unless she had a reason to trust them. There was something more going on, something deeper. At that moment, a sudden sound echoed through the jungle. It was sharp, a crackling noise like branches breaking. The lioness's head whipped around, her eyes wild with fear. The hairs on the back of Elara's neck stood up. Something was coming, something huge. "Everyone back," Elara ordered, her voice urgent. But it was too late. From the shadows of the trees, a massive form emerged. The creature that had been lurking at the edge of the clearing was no longer just a vague silhouette. It was large, much larger than any predator they had encountered before, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Its fur was dark, almost black, and it moved with a terrifying grace, its massive paws silent against the earth as it crept closer. It was a creature unlike anything Elara had ever seen. Its body was sleek, like that of a feline, but its features were alien, exaggerated. Sharp, angular, it was a hybrid of sorts, a blending of both familiar and unfamiliar traits. Its eyes burned a deep, unsettling red, and the way it moved, sinister, calculated, made Elara's blood run cold. The lioness growled, her body tensing, but she did not attack. Instead, she positioned herself in front of her cubs, blocking them from view, her eyes locked on the creature that had entered their territory. "Elara," Mara said, her voice cracking with disbelief. "What is that?" "I don't know," Elara answered, her heart racing as she reached for her weapon. "But we need to find out." The creature took another step forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't making any sounds, no growls or hisses. It was silent, almost ghostly in its approach. The lioness growled again, a deeper, more menacing sound this time, her body coiled like a spring, ready to pounce. "Elara," Mara's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not attacking, it's waiting." "Waiting for what?" Elara murmured, her mind racing. And then it hit her, the connection between the predator and the creature before them. The lioness wasn't defending her cubs from the new predator. She was protecting them from something far greater, something that had already been woven into the fabric of the jungle, something that had been here long before they ever arrived. The creature before them wasn't just an apex predator. It was part of something larger, an ancient force that had existed in the shadows of the jungle for millennia. Elara felt her breath catch in her throat. This was no ordinary predator. This was something that had been created, or perhaps awakened, for one purpose: to challenge the balance that had existed between humans and the apex predators for centuries. "Elara, what are you thinking?" Mara's voice cut through her thoughts. Elara turned toward the team, her mind now clear. "We need to find out who or what sent this thing here, and fast. If we don't, this is only the beginning." As the alien creature slowly advanced toward the lioness, Elara understood the terrible truth. The delicate trust between humanity and the predators was about to be tested in ways no one could have predicted, and the price of failure would be far greater than they had ever imagined. The air hung thick with tension as the creature crept closer, its red eyes glimmering with an eerie, unnatural light. The jungle had fallen unnervingly silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves underfoot and the quiet growl of the lioness. Elara felt a prickle of dread slide down her spine, as she watched the massive predator inch toward them, its movements fluid and purposeful, almost predatory in their deliberation. But the strangest thing about the creature was its silence. There were no growls, no snarls, just an unsettling quiet. It was as though it wasn't quite part of the jungle, like it had somehow been pulled from a nightmare and deposited into their reality. The lioness remained steadfast, her body positioned between the cubs and the new threat. She was ready to fight, but something about the creature's presence, its calm, measured approach, kept her at bay. It wasn't that the lioness didn't want to protect her cubs. It was as if she knew that engaging the creature was a mistake, that it was more than just an adversary she could overpower. "Elara, what's going on?" Mara's voice crackled through the comms, her fear evident despite her professional tone. Elara didn't respond immediately. Her mind was racing, piecing together the puzzle of this new intruder. It wasn't just the lioness's unusual behavior or the creature's menacing aura that unsettled her. It was the undeniable sense that this thing was not of this world, literally. She had encountered alien lifeforms before, during various research expeditions to distant planets and ecosystems. But this was different. There was no logical explanation for how or why it was here, but it was here, and it was playing a game that Elara wasn't sure she was equipped to understand. The creature stopped about 10 meters from the lioness, its head tilting slightly to the side as though it was studying her, considering her worth. Its eyes flicked over the humans, sizing them up, though it showed no signs of aggression. Yet. The lioness's growl grew louder, vibrating in the air, a warning that it would not tolerate the intrusion. But still, the alien predator did not move. It was almost as if the two predators were locked in some sort of standoff, a silent communication taking place between them, something ancient and primal. Elara held her breath, her eyes flickering between the two creatures. This wasn't just about territory or hunger. This was about something more fundamental, something that even the most seasoned biologists couldn't fully comprehend. These creatures had no reason to fight unless there was something driving them, something beyond the animal instincts that governed most of Earth's predators. "We can't just sit here," Mara said, her voice low. "We have to do something." Elara shook her head slowly. "If we move now, we'll provoke it. We need to stay still." Mara's expression was tense, but she didn't argue. The rest of the team stood at the ready, weapons in hand but lowered, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger a chain reaction neither they nor the creatures were prepared for. Suddenly, the creature's eyes narrowed, focusing on the lioness with a chilling intensity. It was then that Elara noticed something even more unsettling. Its pupils weren't like those of any predator she had ever seen. They were not round, but elongated, slit-like, and there was a faint shimmer of silver running along the edges, as though they were reflecting something otherworldly. It was almost as if the creature wasn't entirely biological. Without warning, the creature's body shifted, its legs tensing, its back arched in preparation. For a fleeting moment, Elara thought it was going to launch itself at the lioness, but instead, it did something far more unexpected. The creature's form seemed to ripple, as though it were made of liquid, its silhouette blurring momentarily before snapping back into focus. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. The ground beneath them trembled slightly. "Elara," Mara said urgently, "what was that?" "I don't know," Elara replied, her voice tight with disbelief. "But I think it's trying to communicate." Her words hung in the air, impossible to comprehend. Communication? Between predators of such vastly different natures? The creature's form shifted again, and for a brief instant, its eyes met Elara's. There was something in those eyes, something that wasn't quite animal, nor was it fully alien. It was almost as though it recognized her. Elara took a cautious step forward, her hand held out in an instinctive gesture of peace. She wasn't sure why she did it. It wasn't like her to take such risks. But something in that moment, something in the creature's gaze, made her feel like it wasn't just a predator, it was something else, something ancient, perhaps even a kind of sentinel. It was watching, judging, waiting to see if humanity had a place in this new order of things. To her surprise, the creature's posture softened slightly, its body relaxing. It was still alert, but it wasn't threatening. The lioness, however, was still tense, her growls low but constant, a reminder that she was not entirely convinced of the creature's intentions. Ilara turned to Mara, her thoughts churning. "I think it's evaluating us," she said softly. "It's assessing whether we're a threat." "Are you sure?" Mara asked, incredulous. Ilara nodded, her mind already jumping ahead. "There's something I've been missing. I've seen these patterns before, an animal's behavior shifting in response to an unknown force. It's not just instinct anymore, it's something else." The creature took another step, closer now to the lioness. Its strange, elongated form shimmered again as it moved, and Ilara realized it was not just walking on solid ground, but gliding, as though its body was part liquid, part solid. Her scientific mind struggled to make sense of what she was witnessing. Was this a product of genetic engineering? But just as quickly as it had approached, the creature stopped once more, its eyes locking with the lioness's. The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath again, a moment of stillness stretching out unnaturally long. The predator and the lioness stood frozen in time, a standoff between two forces of nature. And then, without any clear indication, the creature turned away. It didn't retreat, but it didn't approach either. Its body rippled again, its form almost dissolving into the mist, and before Ilara could fully process what was happening, it was gone, vanished into the jungle as if it had never existed. The lioness blinked, her growls slowly fading. She stood there for a few moments, as if processing what had just occurred, before turning and loping back toward the den. Her cubs emerged from their hiding place, eyes wide with confusion, but unharmed. The air in the clearing felt empty. The oppressive sense of danger, of something hanging over them, lifted just as abruptly as it had descended. "Ilara, what the hell was that?" Mara asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Ilara admitted, her mind racing to catch up with the events that had just unfolded. "But I think we've just witnessed something that isn't supposed to be here, and it's far from over." Mara shook her head. "You think it's connected to the changes we've seen in the other predators?" "I don't think it's just connected," Ilara replied, her voice low, her mind churning with new theories. "I think it's the cause." The weight of her words hung in the air as they all stood there, trying to make sense of what they had just seen.